A summit has now been confirmed. An encounter that will draw the attention of every major capital in the world. President Donald Trump will meet Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska next week, a meeting that will mark Putin's first appearance on United States soil in a decade. The symbolism is unmistakable. The stakes are immense. This is not a ceremonial handshake for cameras. It is an attempt to explore the possibility of ending one of the most destructive conflicts of the 21st century, Russia's war in Ukraine. The announcement comes after months of indirect positioning, economic pressure, and diplomatic signaling. On the surface, the meeting is about the war in Ukraine, but in reality, it sits at the center of a much larger game involving energy markets, global trade, military alliances, and the credibility of American power. What is at stake is not only the shape of any eventual ceasefire, but also the perception of which power the United States or Russia will control the terms of engagement in the years ahead. The central obstacle is territory. According to sources cited by the Wall Street Journal, Russia has made it clear that it wants Ukraine to formally hand over its eastern regions, territory it currently occupies and considers non-negotiable. President Trump has hinted publicly that his approach involves territorial adjustments, some getting back, some switched, a swapping of territories to the betterment of both. The language is intentionally vague, a negotiating posture designed to leave room for maneuver. But in Kyiv, the position is equally clear. Ukraine's constitution requires a national referendum before any territorial concessions can be made, and President Volodymyr Zelensky has stated repeatedly that no Ukrainian leader has the authority to give away Ukrainian land. Zelensky's warning is as much for international audiences as it is for domestic ones. Any decisions that are without Ukraine are decisions against peace, he declared, emphasizing that solutions imposed from outside will not hold. This is not simply a matter of national pride. It is a calculation rooted in history. Ukraine has seen what happens when agreements are struck without full participation of the primary parties. The memory of the Minsk agreements and the annexation of Crimea is still fresh, and the strategic environment today is even less forgiving. It remains uncertain whether a trilateral meeting between Trump, Putin, and Zelensky will materialize. The initial concept was to have Trump and Putin meet first, then bring Zelensky into a broader negotiation framework. But Putin has resisted even the symbolic optics of sitting down with the Ukrainian president, preferring to deal directly with Washington. This choice itself is a signal, suggesting that in Moscow's view, Ukraine is not an equal negotiating counterpart, but an object of bargaining between greater powers. While the Ukraine conflict dominates headlines, it is only one theater in a much larger diplomatic offensive by the Trump administration. On the Friday before the summit announcement, President Trump presided over the signing of a peace framework between Armenia and Azerbaijan, ending more than 3 decades of intermittent conflict that began after Armenia declared independence in 1991. That war was rooted in territorial disputes over Nagorno-Karabakh and the strategic corridor between Azerbaijan and Turkey. The agreement now on the table, described by Baku's leadership as the Trump route, would give Azerbaijan direct access to Turkey for the first time in decades. For Azerbaijan, the deal unlocks new economic and strategic possibilities. For Armenia, it represents both an end to isolation and a concession that the old status quo is no longer sustainable. For Washington, it is a demonstration that American diplomatic power, when applied with focus and leverage, can reshape regional balances that have resisted resolution for generations. The White House has been quick to frame this achievement within a broader pattern. Administration officials point to a series of conflicts that have cooled or ended under Trump's watch in the past 200 days: Thailand and Cambodia, Israel and Iran, Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, India and Pakistan. The claim is not that every issue is resolved permanently, but that the kinetic phase of these disputes has been halted or significantly reduced through direct engagement and pressure. In an era when many leaders speak of peace as an aspiration, Trump's team is presenting it as an operational outcome. Supporters argue that such a track record strengthens the case for awarding Trump the Nobel Peace Prize. They note that within 6 months he has brokered or facilitated agreements in conflicts that have persisted for decades. Critics counter that many of these arrangements are fragile, that underlying disputes remain unresolved, and that claiming credit for peace in one area does not absolve failures in others. The Nobel Committee, dominated by European perspectives, will weigh not only achievements, but also the broader political context, including the controversial nature of Trump's foreign policy and its divergence from conventional diplomatic norms. The example of Armenia and Azerbaijan is instructive. For 3.5 decades, this conflict defied resolution despite multiple mediation attempts by Russia, France, and the United States. The Trump administration's breakthrough relied on leveraging economic incentives, security guarantees, and third-party partnerships, particularly with Turkey, to create a mutually beneficial outcome. This is the same structural approach being prepared for Ukraine and Russia, but on a far more complex and dangerous scale, with nuclear powers directly involved. Past experience warns that ceasefires without structural change can be little more than strategic pauses. In 2014, after Russia's annexation of Crimea, a peace agreement was signed under the Normandy format with the participation of Germany and France. That arrangement froze lines temporarily but allowed Moscow to consolidate its gains, rebuild its military capacity, and prepare for the larger offensive launched in 2022. Critics fear that any deal struck now could serve a similar purpose, giving Russia breathing space to adapt to sanctions, deepen ties with partners like China and Iran, and prepare for renewed conflict under more favorable conditions. The counter-argument from the Trump administration is that the conditions today are fundamentally different. Trump has pushed NATO allies toward defense spending targets of 5% of GDP, far above previous commitments. If sustained, this would rapidly close the ammunition production gap between NATO and Russia, reversing Moscow's current advantage. The administration also points to the use of economic pressure on India, doubling tariffs to signal dissatisfaction with its deepening imports of Russian oil as evidence of a willingness to apply indirect pressure on Moscow's economic enablers. India's position is a critical piece of the puzzle. Before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russia supplied only a small fraction of India's oil imports. Today, that figure is around 40%. By targeting India economically, Washington is challenging one of the main revenue streams, sustaining Moscow's war effort, while signaling to New Delhi that long-term strategic partnership with the United States requires alignment on core security issues. The Alaska summit is therefore not an isolated diplomatic event. It is the centerpiece of a multi-axis strategy that combines direct negotiation, alliance strengthening, and economic leverage. The choice of Alaska as a venue is calculated. It is American territory acquired from Russia in 1867, purchased for $7.2 million at roughly 2 cents an acre. In today's context, it serves as both symbolic reminder and strategic ground. A location under complete U.S. control, rich in energy resources, and central to Arctic security dynamics, where U.S. and Russian interests already intersect. Critics of the summit argue that inviting Putin to U.S. soil signals weakness or legitimizes Russian aggression. Supporters counter that hosting the meeting in Alaska is a show of strength, a home game for the United States, with Washington setting the stage, controlling the environment, and projecting confidence in its ability to negotiate from a position of advantage. Yet beyond symbolism, the outcome will hinge on whether the talks can produce more than vague commitments. A successful negotiation would need to secure a verifiable ceasefire, mechanisms for monitoring compliance, and a framework for long-term political settlement that keeps Ukraine's sovereignty intact while addressing Russia's stated security concerns. This is a near-impossible balancing act, one that will test the limits of Trump's deal-making style in the unforgiving arena of geopolitics. The Nobel Peace Prize debate is likely to intensify regardless of the summit's outcome. Trump supporters point not only to the Abraham Accords normalizing relations between Israel and several Arab states during his first term, but also to his current record in reducing active conflicts. They argue that had another U.S. president achieved similar results, International institutions and Western media would already be framing them as historic. Detractors will focus on unresolved crises, ongoing violence in places like Gaza, and the perception that Trump's policies favor transactional deals over deeper systemic change. The Gaza conflict itself underscores the difficulty of defining peace in today's environment. 2 years after the October 7th terrorist attack, the death toll among Palestinians has surpassed 60,000. Regional actors view the prospect of Saudi Arabia joining the Abraham Accords as both a potential stabilizer and a provocation, depending on their strategic orientation. Iran's opposition to such normalization is rooted in the fear that it would consolidate a U.S.-aligned bloc in the Middle East, altering the balance of power in ways unfavorable to Tehran. This web of conflicts, negotiations, and shifting alliances is the backdrop to the Alaska summit. What happens there will not only influence the war in Ukraine, it will signal to allies and adversaries alike whether the United States can still shape outcomes in the age of multipolar competition. If Trump emerges with a credible ceasefire plan, it will strengthen his argument that American leadership, applied decisively, can deliver results where others have failed. If the talks falter, or produce only symbolic gestures, it will reinforce the perception that even the most powerful states are constrained by the entrenched dynamics of modern conflicts. In the calculus of global strategy, perception is often as important as reality. For Washington, the Alaska meeting is an opportunity to demonstrate that the United States remains the central node in resolving great power disputes. For Moscow, it is a chance to appear on equal footing with Washington while probing for concessions. For Kyiv, it is a moment of high risk where decisions could be made that shape the nation's fate for decades. The world will watch, not only to see whether guns fall silent in Ukraine, but to measure the balance of influence in a rapidly changing international order. And in that sense, the true audience for the Alaska summit is not just the people of Ukraine or Russia. It is every nation calculating its place in the emerging architecture of 21st century geopolitics.